The music didn't stop when he said it. That was the first thing I noticed. The string quartet in the corner kept playing, soft, polished. Completely unaware that the room had already changed shape, my fiancé lifted my left hand in front of 40 people, looked directly at the ring on my finger and said, "Before anyone gets too impressed, it's not real." He smiled when he said it. That mattered. If he had sounded angry, someone could have blamed nerves. If he had sounded embarrassed, someone could have blamed a misunderstanding. If he had whispered it to me, we could have called it cruelty and kept it private. He did none of those things. He said it clearly, lightly, like a joke with perfect timing. And when people near us laughed because they didn't know what else to do, he added, "It's a placeholder. The actual ring comes later." That was the moment I understood I was no longer standing inside a celebration. I was standing inside a demonstration. My name is Corinne Vale. I was 29 years old that night. The party was being held on the rooftop terrace of the Halcyon House Hotel, 6 floors above a city that looked expensive enough to flatter everybody inside it. Lanterns hung from black iron hooks. The catering staff moved in neat lines with trays of champagne and things too small to satisfy real hunger. My future mother-in-law wore pale gold and kept touching people's elbows when she laughed, as if her warmth had to be physically placed into the room to feel believable. Everything had been chosen for photographs. The flowers were white and low, so nobody's face would be blocked. The lighting was warm but directional. The welcome sign near the entrance had our names in gold script, tall enough for videos, not just guests. Even the cake was more architectural than edible. It should have felt like a beginning. Instead, from the moment I arrived, it felt like being invited into a room that had already decided what role I was supposed to play. That had been happening for months. Not dramatically. Never dramatically. Jonah Mercer did not believe in obvious domination. He believed in calibrated correction. He preferred small public adjustments over private conflict because public adjustments let him keep the tone light while the lesson still landed. If a waiter asked me about the wine, Jonah answered first. If I told a story, he improved it halfway through. If I picked a restaurant, he told everyone afterward that I was finally learning taste. None of it, on its own, looked like a warning. That's how people like him survive. They build power in moments too small to protest without looking unstable. By the time something truly public happens, everyone around you has already been trained to call your discomfort oversensitivity. The ring had been the exception. Or I thought it had. He proposed 3 months earlier on the bluff road above Sable Point, where the cliffs dropped into dark water and the wind made every sentence sound slightly more serious than it might have in a parking lot. It had not been perfect, which is one reason I believed it. My hair kept blowing into my lipstick. He almost dropped the ring box once because his hands were cold. He didn't kneel elegantly. He just looked at me with a kind of nervous determination I had never seen on him before and said, "I want to build the rest of my life with you before one of us gets too good at pretending we don't need the other." It was imperfect, human, believable. I said yes. The ring itself was not enormous, which I liked. Oval stone, slim platinum band, old-fashioned setting, not flashy, not designed to announce itself from across a room. When he slid it onto my finger, he said, "It belonged to my grandmother before she reset it. My mother kept it. Now it's yours." That mattered to me more than the stone. Not because of price, because of continuity. I had grown up around women who kept family jewelry like memory with metal attached. My own mother's wedding band was still in the blue dish by her sink 2 years after the divorce because some objects don't stop belonging to your body just because the story around them collapses. So, yes, the ring mattered. Not as proof of value, as proof of trust. If it had belonged to his family and he had chosen to place it on my hand, then I wasn't just receiving a promise. I was being moved into a line. That is why what he said on the terrace wasn't just embarrassing. It was structural. Because in one sentence, he didn't merely insult the ring. He withdrew the legitimacy around it. He made me look like a woman standing in front of both families wearing costume symbolism, while he remained the only person in the room with access to the real future. A placeholder. The actual ring comes later. Listen carefully to a man who uses future gifts to reduce present trust. He is telling you exactly where he thinks power should live. He was still holding my hand when he said it. That detail stayed with me. His fingers warm around my wrist, his thumb resting just below the setting, possession disguised as presentation. I looked at him, not at the guests, not at the ring, at him. He expected something specific. I could see it in the tiny readiness around his mouth. A laugh, maybe. A flustered protest. A soft, "Jonah, stop." Anything that would let him step in and define the moment for both of us. Instead, I said, "What did you just say?" The quartet kept playing. A server passed behind us with champagne flutes on a silver tray and did not break stride. A woman from Jonah's office, whom I barely knew, but had already learned to dislike, looked between us with immediate interest, the way certain people do when discomfort appears in public and they sense a hierarchy lesson coming. Jonah smiled wider. Not kind. Performative. I said, "Don't let the sparkle fool you." A few people laughed again. Not because it was funny, because he had given them a socially acceptable interpretation. Joke, teasing. Affluent people humiliating each other gently because they assume money makes everything lighter. One of his friends, Coulter, the one who had made 3 comments all year about women who understand upgrades, said, "Smart move, man. Test the response before the investment." That got a bigger laugh. That was the second moment the room moved against me. Not because they agreed with him, because they were willing to align with the tone he had set. That's all it takes. Not malice. Compliance. I slid my hand out of his grip. Slowly. He noticed that. His smile flickered for a fraction of a second, then returned. "Relax," he said. "You're making a face." That sentence tells you almost everything about a certain kind of man. First he injures, then he critiques the visible effect of the injury. Because if your reaction becomes the issue, the original act gets to disappear inside it. My future mother-in-law, Celeste, arrived beside us then with the timing of a woman who had spent 30 years cleaning up after one dominant male personality by developing weather instincts. "What's going on?" she asked. Jonah answered before I could. "Nothing. Corinne just found out the ring is temporary." Temporary? Interesting. The language had already shifted. Not fake now. Temporary, lighter, more tasteful, easier to defend. I looked at Celeste, then at the ring, then back at Jonah, and in that small triangle of movement, something aligned in my head that should have aligned months earlier. This was not an accident. Not nerves, not one bad joke. He had prepared this, maybe not with a script, but with an intention. The venue, the audience, the timing. Just after toasts, just before cake, while everyone still had enough champagne in them to misread cruelty as confidence. He wanted public imbalance. He wanted me visibly smaller than the role I had been standing in. That realization didn't make me angry immediately. It made me clear. There is a difference. Anger still negotiates with the hope that another person can be brought back inside shared reality. Clarity gives up on that before anybody has to raise their voice. "What do you mean temporary?" I asked. He shrugged with one shoulder, the same gesture he used whenever he wanted to sound superior without appearing emotionally invested. "It means I wasn't going to put a real diamond on someone's hand without being completely sure." The room didn't gasp. Again. Worse. It absorbed. People looked away and back again. Sipped drinks. Adjusted posture. The social machinery of public discomfort began doing what it always does, searching for the highest status interpretation and moving toward it. One of my college friends, Dana, who had flown in from Chicago and had never learned how to fake comfort for wealthy men, said, "Excuse me?" That helped. Not because it rescued me. Because it interrupted the slide. Jonah laughed softly. "Please. You all know how these things go. A lot of people love engagement. Fewer people are ready for marriage." There it was. Not about money at all. about evaluation. The ring wasn't fake because of budget. It was fake because he wanted to reserve the right to decide whether I had earned reality. He had turned commitment into a reward system and unveiled that structure in public. That is not intimacy. That is social training. I should tell you something else. 3 weeks earlier, I had caught him in a small lie. Not affair level, not explosive. The kind people talk themselves out of respecting because it looks too administrative to count. He had told me he'd sent the final deposit for the venue. Later that week, the event coordinator called me by mistake and asked whether she should worry about the overdue payment. I asked Jonah that night. He smiled, apologized, transferred the money in front of me, and turned the entire conversation into evidence that I was too tense around logistics. I let it go. That was my mistake. Not because the venue deposit mattered, because deception followed by tone policing is never isolated. It's a rehearsal. The ring was simply the first time he had taken the rehearsal public. Dana stepped closer to me. Another useful detail. People reveal their alignment through distance long before they say a word. "You told her it was your grandmother's ring," she said to Jonah. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. "It is my grandmother's setting," he said. "The original stone is secured." Secured. Like I was wearing a placeholder body while the real woman would arrive later if I performed well enough. I heard somebody near the bar whisper, "Oh my God." Good. At least one person in the room still recognized shame when it happened in expensive shoes. My mother, Helena, had not yet reached us. She was still across the terrace talking to my aunt and laughing too hard at something one of Jonah's cousins had said. For one childish second, I wanted her to stay there forever. Not because she wouldn't have helped, because I did not want this moment translated into maternal pain before I had fully understood my own. Jonah lifted his glass, still smiling, still performing. "Now that we've cleared up the ring mythology," he said, "can we get back to celebrating what actually matters?" That was the sentence that ended it. Not "it's fake," not placeholder. This one. Because it showed the architecture under everything else. He had humiliated me publicly, then asked the room to move on according to his timing. That is the move. Always. Injury followed by pace control. I looked around the terrace, at the guests pretending not to watch, at the musicians who had finally started slowing because even they could feel the room had left them behind. At the city lights below us, blurred softly through glass and summer haze. At the cake with our initials still intact. At the women from his office who would absolutely clip this into some private chat later and call it complicated. At the ring on my finger, which had not changed at all and yet had somehow become a stage prop because he said so. Then I looked back at him and understood the next decision. I could ask for receipts, ask his mother what the ring really was, argue over stones and settings and appraisals while a crowd watched. I could stay in the frame he had built, or I could leave it. That was the real choice. Not whether the ring was genuine. Whether I was going to let the conversation remain about jewelry when what had actually been exposed was control. I touched the ring once with my thumb, not to admire it, to confirm its weight. Then I smiled. That surprised him. Not because I looked happy, because he had expected injury. A smile under public humiliation creates a different kind of silence. People don't know whether they are about to witness forgiveness or something worse. He looked at me more carefully. "What?" he asked. I took off the ring. Not quickly, not dramatically. A slow, clean motion, the kind that cannot be mistaken for impulse. The platinum band caught the terrace light once before I set it down on the linen tablecloth between the champagne glasses and the untouched dessert forks. The quartet stopped playing, not all at once. The first violin carried 2 more notes before realizing the room had left the music behind. That detail stayed with me. How long beauty keeps trying after tension has already won. No one spoke, not even Jonah. That was new, because for the first time that night I had made a move he hadn't pre-written. I picked up my clutch, adjusted the strap on my shoulder. Then I said the only sentence the moment required. You should have checked whether I was temporary too. And I walked out. Not running, not crying, not looking back to see what their faces did. That was deliberate. Because once you turn around, you are asking the room for one more reading of your exit. I didn't need one. I crossed the terrace, past the sign with our names on it, went through the hotel doors and into the elevator with 3 strangers who smelled like expensive perfume and one person's panic. None of them said anything. Good. The elevator mirrored all 4 walls. I could see myself from angles I did not want. The dress, the bare hand, the flatness in my face where public humiliation should have left a dramatic crack if I had been in the kind of story Jonah thought he was staging. When the doors opened to the lobby, my phone started vibrating. Once, then again, then 3 times in quick succession. Jonah, Celeste. Unknown number. Dana, my mother. The digital version of the room reorganizing itself around the event. I didn't answer any of them. Outside, the night air felt warm and contaminated. The valet looked at me, then at my hand, then wisely at nothing. I gave him my ticket. He jogged off. The hotel fountain kept throwing water into the same blue-lit basin as if nothing had happened anywhere in the building above it. That's the worst thing about public humiliation. The world remains offensively operational. I stood on the curb under the marquee lights and finally let myself think one clear thought. He had not lied about the ring because he doubted me. He had lied about the ring because he needed an audience. That meant the stone was never the point, which meant whatever truth sat underneath it was going to be uglier, more useful, and probably more expensive than embarrassment. My car arrived. I got in, closed the door. Only then did I unlock my phone. 43 notifications, 3 missed calls from Jonah, 1 from Celeste, 2 from my mother, a message from Dana. Do not go back upstairs, call me first. I'm serious. That tightened something in me. Not fear, pattern recognition. Because Dana was not a dramatic person. She worked in compliance law for a medical devices company and had spent most of our friendship making every sentence sound more reasonable than it felt. If she said call me first, then something upstairs had already moved from ugly to useful. I called her. She answered on the first ring. Drive, she said. Don't stop anywhere near the hotel. I put the car in reverse. What happened? A pause. Then, he's telling people he did it because the ring was never meant for you. I went still. Not physically, internally. Meaning? Another pause. Longer this time. Then Dana said, very carefully, apparently the ring belongs to someone else. That was the first twist. Not fake stone. Wrong woman. And suddenly the whole evening rearranged itself into something colder than cruelty. Not humiliation for dominance. Humiliation for transfer. I pulled out into traffic. Didn't signal fast enough. A horn sounded somewhere behind me. Didn't matter. What does that mean? I asked. Dana lowered her voice. I heard him telling Coulter that if tonight went badly, it was better to do it publicly before legal things got complicated. Legal things. That phrase entered the car like a weapon laid on the seat beside me. I drove 3 blocks without speaking, then said, what legal things? I don't know yet, she said. But Corinne, this was not a bad joke. He planned something bigger than the ring. And that was the moment the engagement ended completely. Not on the terrace. Not when I put the ring down. Here, in traffic. With the city lights moving past my windshield and the understanding settling in that Jonah had not humiliated me because he was impulsive. He had humiliated me because he was preparing the room for a version of events where I would leave empty-handed and look unreasonable doing it. Whatever came next. Apartment, accounts, lease, contracts, gifts, anything with both our names on it. He intended to control the story first. I tightened both hands on the steering wheel and said, come to my place. I'm already in a rideshare. Good. That was the first right thing to happen all night. Because if he had turned the ring into a public prop, then I was going to need more than dignity now. I was going to need sequence. I was going to need documents, and above all, I was going to need to get to our apartment before he did. I broke 3 traffic laws getting home. Not in a cinematic way. No sirens, no tires, just the ordinary small illegalities people commit when fear has already done the math and decided shame can be paid later. I took a left too late through a yellow that should have become red before I cleared it. Stopped in a loading zone outside my building because circling for a legal spot suddenly felt like the kind of delay other people regret for the rest of their lives. I left the engine running when I bolted through the lobby because tickets were cheaper than losing access. That was the first real decision after the terrace, not whether the relationship was over. That had already happened. The question now was simpler and colder. What was he trying to get to before I understood I needed to stop him? My building was not elegant enough to justify panic. That helped. 2 elevators, one usually slower than regret. Gray carpet in the hallway. Brass numbers on the doors polished by maintenance staff who understood that middle-income buildings survive on the illusion of order more than the thing itself. I lived on the 9th floor. Jonah had moved in 8 months earlier, though if you asked him, he would have described it as consolidating our life. Because the man never used plain language where proprietary language might imply ownership. By the time I stepped out of the elevator, Dana was at my door. She wore the same black dress she'd had on at the party, except she'd kicked off the heels and was holding them by the straps like weapons she'd grown tired of. Her face was calm. That mattered. Not because the situation was calm, because Dana did not respect panic enough to perform it when a timeline needed building. "You got here first," she said. "Yes." "Good." Same word she had used on the phone. Good. Tonight, that word was becoming the opposite of comfort. It meant useful. It meant evidence still existed. It meant the living, the throw, utility, we were so, he handled, I walked, not because, mine there. Jonah, we need to, he never, nothing theatrical. Every sentence built to look measured while still moving control toward him. I opened the closet in the office. 2 lockboxes on the top shelf. One mine, one his. Mine still there. His gone. That made me laugh once under my breath. Dana looked over. "What?" "He didn't come for emotion," I said. "He came for documents." "And he took his own box?" "He took his own box and some of ours." "Which means he knows exactly what matters." Yes. And that was the useful part. Cruel people are easier to understand once they stop pretending sentiment motivates them. I went to the kitchen drawer where we kept spare keys, checkbooks, batteries, and all the other little domestic lies people call organization. My passport card was still there. The emergency cash envelope still there. The engagement photographer's final invoice still clipped under a magnet on the fridge. But the bank envelope from 2 weeks ago, the one containing the updated statement for the joint savings account, was gone. That changed my breathing. Not panic. Narrowing. Because now we weren't talking about narrative alone. We were talking about money movement. "When does your bank open?" Dana asked. "Branches? 9. Fraud line? Now." She was right. Of course she was right. I had been seconds from doing what most women are trained to do under emotional injury. Sit down, process the betrayal, and call the man who caused it to ask him what it means. No, not this time. This time meant passwords. This time meant locks. This time meant getting ahead of grief before grief made me stupid. I called the bank. Identity verification, security questions, mother's maiden name, first grade teacher, last 4 digits. My voice sounded steady enough to belong to someone handling a billing discrepancy, not a life detonation. "I need to freeze withdrawals on a joint savings account," I said. The representative's keyboard clicked for a few seconds. "Is there suspected unauthorized activity?" "Yes." Pause. "Can you confirm whether transactions are pending?" More clicking. Then, "There was an online transfer attempt 23 minutes ago. It did not complete due to secondary verification." I closed my eyes once. 23 minutes. That put him in the apartment almost exactly when the guests on the terrace were probably still pretending his joke had landed harmlessly. He had not come home to collect himself. He had come home to move money. That was the first true answer of the night. The ring wasn't fake to embarrass me. The ring was fake to create instability. If the room saw me as exposed, foolish, overinvested, then whatever he did next with joint accounts, travel deposits, or vendor money could be explained later as practical damage control from the sensible party. Humiliation first, financial repositioning second. That was the structure. The representative froze the account. I changed the password on every shared service I could think of while Dana moved through the apartment, making an inventory I hadn't known to make. She opened cabinets, photographed drawers, not because she was paranoid, because once somebody makes one fast move under cover of social chaos, you stop granting innocence to timing. His laptop bag is gone, she called from the bedroom. Expected. 2 garment bags, too. I walked to the bedroom doorway. The far side of the closet was emptier than it should have been. Not fully cleared. That would have looked emotional. Jonah didn't do emotional exits. He did selective extraction. Enough to protect himself. Not enough to look like he had planned the leaving. Again, sequencing. What about the ring box? Dana asked. I stared at the dresser. The blue velvet box had sat in the top drawer since the proposal because I didn't trust small, expensive things on bathroom counters, and because some part of me liked that the box still existed. Evidence of origin. Story with hinges. The drawer was open half an inch. I crossed the room, pulled it. The box was gone. For a moment, that was the thing that hurt most. Not the account, not the documents, the empty space where the box had been. Because that was not practical. That was symbolic retrieval. He didn't only want to control money, he wanted to repossess the story. Dana watched my face. What? The box is gone. She nodded slowly, not because that was minor, but because she understood what it meant. He's trying to take origin with him. Yes, exactly. He had publicly framed the ring as not real. Privately removed the box it came in. Which meant the object itself mattered to him in ways he had no intention of admitting in front of witnesses. Call Celeste, Dana said. I looked at her. Why? Because if he said the ring belonged to someone else, his mother knows which lie he thought he was telling. That was good. Not because I wanted her on my side. Because mothers of men like Jonah are often the only people who know which manipulations are old family tools and which are new inventions. I called. She answered on the second ring. Corinne, thank God. Interesting. Not, where are you? Not, please come back. Relief first. That meant she was not controlling the pace either. Did you know? I asked. Silence, then the sound of a door closing on her end. Know what? That he was going to say the ring wasn't real. No. That answer was quick enough to be true or practiced. I couldn't tell yet. Did you know he removed the original stone? Another silence, longer, then there was never another stone. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Dana stopped moving in the doorway. Celeste kept speaking, quieter now. The ring is real. It was always real. It was my mother's. We had it reset after the prongs cracked. There is no replacement, no placeholder, no second version. There it was. The second twist. Not cheap stone. Real ring. Real family piece. Public lie. So the humiliation wasn't only directed at me. He had used his own family history as a disposable prop to lower me in front of an audience. That told me something critical. Men will often degrade women privately with whatever tools they have, but a man willing to degrade his own family mythology in public to gain momentary control over a woman is not merely vain or cruel. He is desperate. What else is he trying to move? I asked. She inhaled slowly, then made a decision of her own. There's a trust. That sentence landed so hard the room seemed to lose ordinary shape for a second. Dana's eyes met mine instantly. Not because the word meant money, because it meant motive. What trust? His grandmother's? The ring grandmother? Yes. How does that involve me? Another pause. Then, because your marriage would have triggered part of it. There it was. Not jealousy, not dominance alone. Asset event, a legal threshold tied to marriage. I stood up again, too quickly this time. The room tilted, then corrected itself. What part? I don't know all of it, Celeste said. Ronan handled the legal side when she passed. But there are family provisions, distribution conditions. He was always touchy about timelines and optics. Optics, of course. So now the sequence widened. Engagement party, public humiliation, immediate retrieval of documents, attempted transfer from the joint account. Ring lie. Trust trigger, not random, not a breakdown. A pivot. Did he think I was going to call off the wedding publicly? I asked. Celeste didn't answer immediately, then. I think he needed it to look like you did. That was the truth at the center. If I left because I was emotional about a fake ring, he could frame the broken engagement as my instability. If the wedding ended under that cloud, any trust provisions tied to marriage, perception, or fault could perhaps be argued in ways I didn't yet understand. He didn't need the crowd to believe the stone was fake forever. He only needed enough confusion for one night and a paper trail he could reach first. I looked around the bedroom, at the empty box space, at the missing statements, at the hangers without suits, at the man-shaped absence arranged neatly enough to sound reasonable later. He had not been improvising. He had been exiting with paperwork. Corinne? Celeste said. Yes. I'm sorry. That one sounded real. Useful? Maybe not. Real? Yes. Was tonight your idea? I asked. No. Did you know he was thinking about calling off the wedding? Silence. Then the answer that told me more than a denial would have. I knew he had been looking at the trust documents again. Good. That was enough. I didn't need her to redeem herself. I needed her accurate. Send me anything you have, I said. What? Anything. Copies, notes, emails. If his grandmother's trust connects to the marriage, I need it tonight. That startled her. Mothers like Celeste are used to managing emotion, not meeting women who can pivot from public humiliation to document strategy before midnight. But surprise is often an ally when you need people to move before the family system closes around them again. I'll look, she said. No, I replied. Do more than look. Then I hung up. Dana stared at me for one full second and said, I like this version of you. I would have laughed if the room had still belonged to laughter. Instead, I said, we need a lawyer. You need your own, she corrected. She was right again. Joint life ending under asset ambiguity is not a breakup. It is a containment event. I called Miriam K., private counsel, family property, and trust litigation. I had met her once at a donor compliance panel and remembered two things. She spoke without extra words, and men twice her age became visibly careful around her. She answered her emergency line herself. I told her 3 facts. Engagement party, public claim about ring authenticity, possible trust trigger tied to marriage and immediate attempted movement of joint funds. She didn't waste a second on sympathy. Do not communicate with him except in writing, she said. Do not return the ring if he asks before we understand title. Do not meet him privately. And Corinne? Yes? If he made the scene before moving money, the scene was part of the transfer strategy. Exactly. That was the first time someone outside me and Dana had named it that cleanly. Miriam continued. Email me everything in the next 30 minutes. Then change every password you forgot existed. I looked at the dark window over the dresser and saw my reflection holding my phone like evidence. On the terrace, he had made me the spectacle. In the apartment, he had tried to make me the unreliable party before I realized there were records in motion. No, not tonight. I walked back to the office, sat down, opened the laptop, and started building the timeline before grief could get there first. The first email from Jonah arrived at 12:18 a.m. Not a text, not a call, an email. That mattered. Because emails are for records, texts are for feelings, calls are for pressure, emails are for future versions of the story. Subject line: "We need to handle this privately." Of course we did. That was exactly what men like Jonah say after they try to stage something publicly and realize the audience may not have landed where they wanted. I opened it. No greeting. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he had said in front of 40 people. Just this: "You left before I could explain that the ring issue was not about humiliating you. It was about forcing an overdue conversation before legal timelines created more damage for both of us. If you respond rationally, we can still avoid making tonight worse than it already is." I read it twice, then once more, not because it was confusing, because it was clean, too clean. By then, I had already learned the rule with him. Whenever he sounded most reasonable, he was usually nearest to the actual mechanism. Not about humiliating you. Forcing an overdue conversation. Legal timelines. Damage for both of us. Respond rationally. Every clause moved responsibility away from him and toward some neutral crisis we were supposedly both trapped inside. No. He had built the crisis. He had just done it in a way designed to sound administrative. Dana was at the kitchen counter using my spare laptop to screenshot every video, story, and public post from the party she could still find before people started deleting things. The terrace scene had already been clipped from 3 angles and uploaded to private stories. One of Jonah's coworkers had written, "Yikes, but maybe honesty is better before marriage?" Good. That mattered. Because witness drift starts early online. The first interpretation doesn't have to be true. It just has to arrive before the facts. "What did he say?" Dana asked. I read the email aloud. She didn't even look up from the screen. "That man writes like a hostage negotiator for a crime he staged himself." Exactly. I forwarded the email to Miriam, then typed the first written response Jonah had not controlled. "Any future communication goes through counsel. Do not enter the apartment again. Do not attempt movement of joint funds. Do not contact vendors or service providers on my behalf." I stared at the message before sending it. 3 lines. No emotion. No accusation. No argument over the ring. That was deliberate. Because once you understand the real fight, you stop swinging at the bait. The ring had never been the center. It was only the cleanest way to make me look unstable in public before he moved toward paper. I sent the email. Then I blocked his number. Not permanently, strategically. Communication through documented channels only. That was the next decision. Not because silence is noble, because he was best in live conversation. He could modulate tone faster than thought. He could turn concern into superiority and superiority into reason in one sentence if nobody wrote him down. I wasn't giving him that room again. The response from Miriam came 9 minutes later. 2 sentences. "Good, do not deviate. I need every document tied to the ring, trust, and prenup draft in one folder before 8 a.m. No comfort. Perfect." Comfort would have slowed me down. I built the folder. Venue deposit receipts, screenshots of the account freeze, photos of the empty ring box drawer, the trust mention from Celeste written down exactly as she had said it, with timestamp because memory becomes less useful the second other people decide to improve it. Then I found the prenup draft, version 4, tracked revisions, 3 clauses highlighted in yellow from my last review. The ones I intended to push back on after the party because I still believed we were negotiating a marriage and not a controlled exit. Clause 11. Reputational damage affecting family-held trusts. Clause 14. Dissolution tied to misrepresentation or public embarrassment. Clause 18. Discretionary withholding, pending review of conduct leading to cancellation. I sat there with the document open and felt the whole evening reorganize itself into something colder. The party had not just been a proposal-adjacent celebration. It had been timing. If he could create a scene in which I appeared vain, unstable, reactive, humiliated over status markers, then a canceled wedding could later be narrated as my public overreaction to a misunderstanding about jewelry. Reputational damage, misrepresentation, conduct leading to cancellation. He didn't need the ring to be fake. He needed the story of the fake ring. That was the mechanism. The trust clause didn't tell me how much money was involved. It didn't need to. It told me enough. His grandmother's estate had left something gated behind image, marriage, and continuity. And Jonah, faced with some threshold he could not control cleanly, had decided to poison the event before it crossed. "What?" Dana asked. I rotated the laptop toward her. She read the clauses once and let out one short breath through her nose. "So he wanted you to leave?" "No," I said. "He wanted me to look like I left for the wrong reason." That difference mattered. Because if I stormed out over a fake ring, he could later say the scene proved exactly what he had privately worried about. My immaturity, my obsession with appearances, my inability to handle family pressure. And if trust distributions, property transfers, or discretionary clauses depended on fault, then public perception became leverage. Everything he did that night had been built around one ugly little truth. In certain families, narrative is an asset class. By 1:07 a.m., Celeste emailed, not from her personal account, from an older address with no signature block, which told me she knew enough to understand internal discovery later might matter. Attached, a scanned trust summary, a 3-year-old family memo, one photograph of the original ring appraisal. The appraisal came first. I opened it. Natural diamond, antique cut, remounted. Significant appraised value, insurance rider active, real ring, always real. That part no longer surprised me. The trust summary did. The language was as polite as a locked drawer. Conditional family distribution upon formal marriage ceremony completed without contest, scandal, or public breach attributable to either named party. There it was. Not a dramatic $1 million reveal. Worse, a mechanism. His grandmother had built morality into money, and then left men like Jonah to decide what counted as scandal. Or perhaps she assumed the word would only ever be used against obvious disasters. Not this. Not a man manufacturing a social wound in order to claim the other party caused the spectacle. I opened the family memo next. Prepared by Jonah's uncle 2 years earlier after the trust attorney retired. Bullet points, internal guidance. 3 names. 1 note beside Jonah's line. Distribution sensitive to public optics. Avoid rushed ceremonies or unstable pairings. Unstable pairings. Leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen. That sentence had probably sat in his head like a private insult ever since. Not because it cost him anything yet. Because it implied someone older, richer, and already dead had anticipated the possibility that his judgment could not be trusted cleanly. Which meant tonight was not only about me. It was also about him proving something to an inheritance structure he resented. That deepened him in a way I hadn't expected. Not into sympathy, into danger. Because a man fighting 2 audiences at once, one living, one dead, is capable of very strange cruelty if he believes public perception stands between him and what should have been his. "Tell me you're seeing this," Dana said. "I'm seeing too much." "Good." I looked at her. "Good? Yes. Because if this were just about humiliation, you'd have less to work with. Men who only want to embarrass you make noise. Men who want to reposition assets leave patterns." She was right. Again. The hardest part about nights like this is that pain wants to narrow your vision. It wants to make the scene the whole story because the scene is emotionally legible. But the scene had only been the opening move. At 1:41 a.m., Miriam called. Not emailed, called. That alone told me the structure had sharpened. "You were supposed to sign the prenup after the party?" she asked without introduction. "Yes." "And if the wedding proceeded, trust distribution triggered?" "That's what it looks like." Good. That word again. Not because things were good, because facts were consolidating. "Listen carefully," she said. "If he publicly diminished the ring, provoked a reaction, and then moved immediately toward shared funds and document retrieval, he was not having a breakdown. He was staging a fault environment." I wrote the phrase down exactly. Fault environment. Because once a lawyer gives the pattern its right name, it stops feeling like random male cruelty and starts feeling like evidence. What do? We get ahead of him. First thing tomorrow, I notify counsel on the trust side that any attempt to assign fault to you will be contested as manufactured conduct. Second, I want a statement from the witness who heard him say the ring was never meant for you. Dana heard that from someone else. Then we need the someone else. "Coulter," she said from the kitchen, or whoever he said it to. I put her on speaker and repeated it. Miriam asked, "Can he be reached?" Dana smiled without humor. "He can always be reached. Whether he tells the truth is another matter." "Truth is negotiable," Miriam said. "Sequence is not. I want texts, timestamps, clips, and any guest who saw you remove the ring before he left the terrace." Again, sequence. Always sequence, because sequence saves you from personality. At 2:05 a.m., another email from Jonah arrived. Subject: "Do not let other people escalate this." Interesting. Not, "You have a projection at 3." She texted, "I read that, so now, but I could," which meant I stared. The woman, both times, because if, into the, but it was by morning, looked at the, by 6, then I did 3 minutes. I could have, about, if I made, he left, enough to let it happen. The ring, the trust, the public humiliation, the timing, the missing documents, the attempted transfer, the ex at the hotel, the mother in the lobby. This wasn't just Jonah. This was system. Family system. Not all of them, but enough of them. Enough to let him believe he could do it. Enough to let him try. I sat down, phone still in hand, and faced the real choice. Not whether to fight him. That was already happening. The real question was, do I protect myself quietly or expose all of it? Because exposing meant more than winning. It meant breaking something bigger. Family reputation, trust structure, relationships that had existed long before I entered them, and once broken, couldn't be repaired. Dana woke up just then, looked at me. "You look like you're about to do something expensive." "I am." "What kind of expensive?" "The kind that doesn't involve money." She nodded once. "Then do it right." I didn't call Jonah, I didn't call Celeste, I didn't call Talia. I wrote one email. To Miriam, subject, full disclosure required. Body, proceed publicly if necessary. I will not contain this. I read it once, then sent it. That was decision 9, and it was the point of no return. It didn't take long. By 8:12 a.m., Jonah called from a different number. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Short, controlled. "Corinne? Whatever you think you know, you're making this worse." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Not out of emotion, out of discipline. Because voice doesn't hold in court. Record does. At 8:37 a.m., Celeste sent one more email. No message, just an attachment. A scanned letter, dated 15 years ago, signed by Jonah's grandmother. I opened it and read the line that explained everything. "The ring will pass only to the woman who strengthens the Mercer line, not divides it." There it was. Not romantic, not symbolic, conditional. The ring was never just jewelry. It was a marker, a signal, a gate. And Jonah had decided I wasn't it. Not privately, Not respectfully, publicly, strategically. He didn't think I was the wrong woman. He thought I was the wrong branch. And branches, in families like his, get cut. Everything was now visible. Only one thing remained: what I would leave behind when I walked away. By the time the 9 a.m. call started, everything had already been decided. Not by them, by me. Miriam didn't waste time. "Here's where we are," she said. He created a public incident tied to a symbolic asset that intersects with a conditional trust. He attempted to reposition shared funds immediately after. He retrieved documents. He initiated narrative control. That's not a breakup. That's a pre-litigation posture. I listened, not because I needed to understand, because hearing it structured removed the last illusion. This was never about love ending badly. It was about control ending abruptly. "What are my options?" I asked. "Two paths," she said. "Contain or expose." I already knew. "Expose." No hesitation. "Good," she continued. "Then we move first. Statement, documentation, witness sequence. Not emotional, factual. You don't defend the ring, you outline conduct." That was the final shift. Stop talking about jewelry, start documenting behavior. At 10:14 a.m., his attorney sent an email. Polished. Predictable. "Our client regrets that last night's event caused discomfort. He maintains that the engagement ring discussion was intended to prompt a necessary conversation about expectations and timing. We strongly advise both parties to resolve matters privately to avoid reputational harm." Reputational harm. There it was again, the word that had guided everything. I forwarded it to Miriam. She replied with one line: "He's still negotiating inside the illusion that you want privacy." I didn't. Not anymore. At 11:02 a.m., we sent the statement. Not to social media first. That would have been noise. We sent it to the Trust Council, to the board he had been trying to influence, to the vendors, to every place where his version might arrive first. Clean, structured, factual. No adjectives, no anger, just sequence. Public statement by Jonah Mercer questioning the authenticity of the engagement ring. Immediate withdrawal of shared financial assets attempted within 30 minutes. Removal of jointly held documentation. Evidence of pre-event meeting with third party connected to prior relationship. Existence of conditional trust linked to marital status and public conduct. Then one final line. Any assertion that the engagement was terminated due to emotional instability or misrepresentation by Corinne Vale will be formally contested as a manufactured narrative supported by documented sequence of events. That was it. No defense, no pleading, no explanation of how I felt. Because how I felt didn't matter. What happened did. He called again. 3 times, different numbers. Then one message finally came through a channel I hadn't blocked yet. Email. Short. No lawyer, no tone control. Just, "What are you doing?" That was the first honest sentence he had sent. Because it contained no strategy, only loss of control. I answered that one. Not immediately. 5 minutes later, enough to remove urgency. Not enough to suggest avoidance. I'm correcting the order of events. That was all. No explanation, no argument, no invitation. Because confrontation doesn't require presence. It requires clarity. It wasn't immediate. That's important. People think consequences explode. They don't. They settle. Over days, then weeks, then quietly. Permanently. The trust didn't vanish, but it paused. Review triggered. Because once public conduct becomes contested, no one releases money until they understand who created the risk. The board didn't remove him. But they stopped deferring. That matters more. Because power doesn't collapse in one motion. It erodes. Vendor contracts didn't cancel. They required joint confirmation, which he no longer had. And the narrative, the one he tried to build, never stabilized. Because it arrived second. And second stories always sound like corrections. The apartment, the shared account, the furniture he had angled for photographs, the future he had planned as a sequence of controlled optics. I didn't fight for any of it. That was decision 10, because fighting over objects would have reduced the story back to property. And this was never about property. I went back once. 3 days later, middle of the afternoon, building quiet, no witnesses. I walked into the bedroom, opened the top drawer, and saw the space where the ring box had been. Still empty. That didn't bother me anymore, because by then, I understood something he didn't. He thought the ring gave him control over the story. He thought taking it back would restore order. He was wrong, because the moment he said it was fake, he made it irrelevant. He tried to turn the ring into proof I wasn't enough. He turned it into proof he couldn't control the truth. He said the ring wasn't real, so I made sure everything else was.